Imagine you just graduated from college and you are pursuing your passions and your dreams into grad school. Your fiancé just proposed and you're picking out your wedding dress, preparing for your beautiful spring wedding. But during the Christmas holiday, tragedy strikes. All of those dreams suspended in time, becoming mere memories for all of the people left behind. Today's video is sponsored by Fetch, and I love Fetch. I've been using it for a while now. Wait till you see how many points I've earned. So Fetch is an easy to use free app where you earn rewards on literally anything you buy. Fetch works with retail receipts from anywhere. You can scan any e-receipt or physical receipt and you will earn points for every purchase, whether you're buying things for fun or just your necessities. So here's how it works. It's so fast, you can scan in seconds. I went to Target to get some holiday items yesterday. Some of them are back here in my set. So all you have to do is take your receipt, open up the Fetch app, press the orange camera button, click snap, then line up your receipt and click submit, and that's it. Even if you have receipts that are like 2 weeks old, you can still scan them and start earning points, and they don't have to be from big retailers either. I've scanned things from the most random stores and Fetch accepted them. After you scan your receipt and get your points, you can redeem those points for hundreds of rewards, including Amazon, Visa, Starbucks, GameStop, Walmart gift cards. I personally like to redeem my points for Starbucks. Plus, you can look in the special offer section right here, and if you buy any of those items, you'll earn even more points. Fetch is 100% free and easy to use. I currently have over 21,000 points. If you already have Fetch, let me know how many points you have. And if you don't have any points, that's okay. Check out the link in my description box and use the code KIMBER to get 5,000 points when you scan your very first receipt. Thanks to Fetch for sponsoring this video. Now let's get into the case for today. One of the things you're gonna notice, my hair is now curly. It went from straight to this while I'm filming on a different day. And that has all to do with my now infamous and highly anticipated dollhouse creation video that hasn't gone live yet. So now we're back to our regularly scheduled programming, and today I'm going to be talking about a very heartbreaking case, and I want to get serious fast. It's one of the saddest cases that I've researched in a very long time. I was in tears multiple times reading about everything that happened, and I can't guarantee that I will keep my composure this entire video. And I can't guarantee you will either, especially if you're a girl like me, a girl that's dreamed of meeting her Prince Charming one day and having a beautiful wedding and kids and the charming home and successful career. It's a big dream, a dream that was coming true for one Tennessee woman, but a dream that ended in a nightmare. I have the absolute pleasure of introducing you to one of the loveliest ladies that I've learned about on this channel. Her name is Johnia Berry, and I love her name so much. It's spelled Johnia. Johnia Berry was born in Bristol, Tennessee on August 26, 1983. Bristol is located in Sullivan County. The population is about 30,000 people. Wikipedia is where it's at sometimes, and I got this information about this area that I thought was so interesting. The city is located near the state line between Tennessee and Virginia, and it's connected to its twin city of Bristol, Virginia. State Street serves as the border between these two cities. One thing that came up every time I was searching for Bristol, Tennessee was the fact that it is known as the birthplace of country music. Every article I read said, believe it or not, even though you thought the birthplace of country was in Nashville, it's not. The first commercial recording was made in Bristol. And one of the first musical groups in Bristol to record country music was the Carter family in 1927. So we are going back. June Carter, the future wife of legendary musician Johnny Cash, was one of them. And I don't know if you're like me, I'm from South Florida, NASCAR is a big thing there, but whether you like it or not, Bristol has one of NASCAR's loudest tracks. It's called the Bristol Motor Speedway. It's a very short track, it's less than a mile long, but it's famous because it has this extreme slope And the stadium is Roman-inspired, so it gives it the appearance of a coliseum. And that's why they call it the last great coliseum. Johnia had 2 biological brothers, Tim and Kelly Burke, from her mother's previous marriage. But when she was 7 years old, her mother, Joan, remarried to a man named Michael Berry. Joan ended up giving Johnia Michael's last name Berry, and she used it from that day forward. As a young girl, Johnia went to Holston View Elementary School and Vance Middle School. Johnia was a cheerleader for Bristol, Tennessee High School, which she was a proud graduate. After graduating high school in 2001, Johnia enrolled at Eastern Tennessee State University, which was about a half an hour away from Bristol in Johnson City. At Eastern Tennessee State University, or ETSU, she studied psychology and criminology. There was no shortage of activities for Johnia to do while she attended ETSU. There are these beautiful historic gardens on top of Roan Mountain on the Appalachian Trail, and they're only 30 minutes from the college. There was a lake nearby where you could go water skiing and boating, and then just 1 hour east is Mount Rogers National Recreation Center. An hour west is the Great Smoky Mountains. Johnson City hosts a variety of festivals throughout the year, such as the Blue Plum Festival and the Rhyme and Roots Reunion. But one of her favorite things to do was dedicate her time to children. Johnia worked as a student assistant for 3.5 years at the Child Study Center. It's an early childhood learning program operated by ETSU. While Johnia enjoyed her time at college, her parents' favorite part was when their daughter came home to visit. They had since moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and every time Johnia arrived home, she would throw open the door and yell, "I'm home!" And Joan Berry was so happy every single time she heard her daughter's voice announcing that she was back for the weekend. As far as Joan was concerned, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Someone else thought something about Johnia was beautiful. Fellow university student Jason White. The two met in 2001 while taking classes in similar subject matter. And they were inseparable. They were more than just dating. They were completely smitten with one another. Jason planned on going to law school. He and Johnia dated throughout their entire time attending ETSU, and by the time they were set to graduate, Johnia decided to follow in Jason's footsteps and go into a legal career. They both planned on attending Thomas Cooley Law School in Michigan, and Johnia was brilliant. She was graduating with 2 degrees from ETSU in the summer of 2004 after only 3.5 years of school. She expected to walk the stage as magna cum laude and receive her diploma in the winter on December 18, 2004. The previous winter, Jason had proposed for the first time. Yes, he proposed more than one time. They were the type of couple that made other people cringe because they were that romantic. It wasn't uncommon for Johnia to joke with Jason that some time had passed and he should propose again because it had been a couple months. The last time Jason got down on one knee was in August. The two of them went to the Mendota River, and on the way there, they had to cross a swinging bridge. Well, to Johnia's surprise, Jason got down on one knee yet again, ring in hand, her engagement ring that she purposely left behind so she wouldn't lose it. They were inseparable, and they had a lot to look forward to. But most of all, they just wanted to spend time together in grad school. Upon graduating from ETSU, Johnia became one of the youngest people to ever be accepted into Thomas Cooley Law School. Wow, that's something to really be proud of. The couple moved to Michigan that summer in anticipation for the fall semester. However, while in her first few months of classes, Johnia realized it was not the right choice. At one point, she called her father to vent. And I know that exact same feeling. She told him that she could not see herself as a lawyer because they seemed like they spent their entire days reading documents. She wasn't wrong. I shared the same viewpoint. And since Johnia has always been passionate about children, she decided to pursue a career in something that she was genuinely passionate about. Because of her change of heart, Johnia moved back to Tennessee, Knoxville to be exact, where she intended to pursue a master's degree in child psychology. She had been accepted for graduate studies at the University of Tennessee, and she planned to enroll in the spring of 2005. This is also when she planned to get married, in April of the very same semester. She wanted a beautiful spring wedding, and she had already picked out her wedding dress. She already had it. She was ready to go. Joan and Mike Berry had no doubt that Johnia had made the right decision. They were happy that she was moving back home to Tennessee. And despite her age only being 21, Johnia was mature, she was level-headed, and her parents trusted her. I can imagine why someone like Jason would be attracted to Johnia. Not only was she gorgeous, I mean gorgeous, she was also smart and generous and charismatic, and she made friends easily. Every time I read something about Johnia, it was positive, how she was just so special. She was the type of person that people were automatically drawn to, but she was drawn to Jason White. Though they were long distance, they loved each other, and they knew the time apart would be worth the wait. Not a day went by that the couple didn't speak to each other on the phone. They would even fall asleep talking to one another, because Johnia really liked that. Upon moving back to Tennessee in 2004 at 21 years old, she was living with another Jason, a close friend who she attended ETSU with. He was one of her friend Stephanie Keene's boyfriend. His name was Jason Amami. He was 23 years old, and he had offered up an extra bedroom in his apartment to her until she could get fully established back in Knoxville. Yes, she was rooming with a guy, but they were merely friends. Johnia even made sure that she was comfortable living with him before she fully committed to moving in. Her mom even came out to spend some time at the apartment and get to know Jason. The apartment that they shared was in a complex called Brendan Park in Knoxville, Tennessee. I looked at it on a map like I always do, and it's a really happening area. Now, I'm not sure it looked exactly the same way back in 2004, but this is not a small town. The mall is only about a 5-minute drive, and it's a built-up area. It has popular chains like Home Depot, FedEx, Costco, and Walmart, among other fun places like golf courses, movie theaters, and lots of places to eat. Johnia was already working 2 jobs. One, because, as I mentioned, she was saving so that she could move out on her own. She only planned to be at Jason's for a couple more months until she could get her own place, but also because the holidays were coming up and she wanted some extra spending money. She was primarily working at a teen center at Peninsula Hospital, but as 2004 came to a close, she had just recently started working part-time at Zales jewelry store in the mall. It's always a busy time during the holidays, and it's nice to have a little extra spending money for presents and for fun. The West Town Mall is exactly what comes to mind when you think of a typical mall. A big food court and stores like Dillard's, Sears, and Belk. Johnia liked to socialize, and she liked to have fun with friends. She didn't have that many in the immediate area, but she did spend time with her coworkers. And on Sunday, December 5th, 2004, it was one of those evenings when work was ending and Johnia wanted to hang out for a bit. It wasn't the best night to go out though, because it was cold and rainy. So her coworkers decided they'd rather call it a night. But they did walk out to their cars together after their shift, saying goodbye and drive safely. She ended work around 6, so she probably got to her car between 6 and 7 o'clock. Johnia got into her Chrysler Sebring convertible and drove off to do some Christmas shopping. First stop, Walgreens. Johnia called her mom while she was there, and she told her she was going to pick up a few more Christmas gifts, and then she was going to go home to wrap them since she was having a night in that night. And by 10 o'clock that night, Johnia was doing just that, wrapping gifts for the children at ETSU. She was thoughtful and caring. She spent her hard-earned money making these kids smile. Her roommate, Jason Amami, came through the doors around the time that she was wrapping the gifts. They sat, they talked for a little bit, and then Johnia decided it was time to get ready for bed while she talked to her fiance, Jason White, like she routinely did. Their call ended around 11 p.m. Only a few hours later, during the early morning hours of December 6, 2004, approximately 4 a.m., a man covered in blood ran into a convenience store and asked for a phone to call 911. Seeing this bloody person running into the store, the employee behind the counter quickly did as the man asked. He called 911 and told the dispatcher that a man had just come through the door, shirtless, and it looked like he had a lot of blood on him, like he'd been in a fight. And then he handed him the phone. This man was Jason Amami, Johnia's roommate. He told 911 that he and his roommate Johnia Berry were sleeping when someone broke into their apartment and attacked them. Someone with a knife. He said he felt someone stab him right in the chest, and then they hit him in the face. And he said that the first thing he did was get up and run. But he said that during the commotion, he heard Johnia screaming from her bedroom, and it was really loud. But he said he didn't have time to help. He had to get out of there. So when he had a chance to escape, he fled the apartment, leaving Johnia behind. Police and paramedics did not know what to expect, but they were dispatched around 4:30 a.m. to 404 Fordora Road and the gas station where Jason had made that call. The EMTs got to Jason and they immediately assessed his injuries. He had definitely been stabbed, but most of the wounds appeared to be pretty superficial. There was one to the chest, one to the arm, and one more significant injury to his right hand on his ring finger, which was very significant. It was a slice through his finger that looked like it could either be from an offensive or a defensive wound. He was either wielding the knife or blocking it by putting his hands up. They couldn't tell. None of his injuries were life-threatening. All but the finger were considered surface wounds, but he was rushed to University of Tennessee Medical Center to be treated. The Brendan Park Apartments, where Jason lived with Johnia, is right off a road called 10 Mile Road. It's right here. Then you turn right into the apartment complex. It's also right next door to another complex called The Element, but I don't know if that was there in 2004. As you come down this driveway, you go right up to the apartment complex that Johnia and Jason lived in. It was the first set of apartments right here on the right in building 404. As you can see, there are a small flight of stairs outside the building that lead up to a glass door where you come inside, and then there's another flight of stairs you go up to the second floor, as well as doors to the first floor apartments. Johnia and Jason's apartment was located on the second floor to the right. The glass door out front is communal, and it does not have a lock. Going through this door, you gain access to the doors of the apartments inside, and there are 6 altogether. When the responding officers arrived at the apartment, they discovered a crime scene unlike any that they had ever encountered. Before they could even make their way upstairs into Johnia's apartment, they discover something at the bottom of the flight of stairs right inside the common door. Horrifically, it's the bloody body of Johnia Berry. She's face down, and she's still alive, but barely. Johnia was struggling to breathe, and she was fighting for her life. And they can tell that she suffered a number of injuries. They asked her if the assailant was still inside her apartment, and she said nothing. Poor Johnia was too weak and unable to speak. However, as a couple of the officers watched her, they thought they saw her faintly nodding yes. So they wanted to enter her unit with caution. They wanted to make sure that there were no other victims, and they had to confirm that the suspect wasn't in the building because he might still be hiding inside, and he could be a danger to personnel unseen. Unaware of what they're walking into, the officers drew their weapons and they entered the dark apartment. In case the suspect was still inside, the officers actually used hand signals to communicate silently to one another as they walked in. When the officers reached Johnia's room, they noticed that there had been a struggle. There were red stains all over the place, which looked like blood. One of the responding officers said that the crime scene at Brendan Park Apartments was the most horrific thing that she had ever seen. She said she will never forget how bloody that bedroom was. It was traumatizing. Once they were able to turn on the lights, they realized the bedroom wasn't the only room that was bloody. There was almost a trail throughout the entire apartment. Walls, floors, furniture, it all had droplets or smears of blood. While the apartment was being searched, EMTs were talking to Johnia and holding her hand until she was fully transported to the back of the ambulance. They didn't want her to be alone. They didn't want her to think she was alone. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. 200 miles away in Atlanta, Johnia's parents, Mike and Joan, were woken up early that morning on December 6th at 5 a.m. by a phone call on Joan's cell phone. When she answered, the person on the other end asked for her husband, Michael. So she was half awake, handing the phone to him. It was someone calling from the University of Tennessee Trauma Center, and they were informing him that his daughter, Johnia, had been a victim of a crime, and they needed to get there as soon as possible to identify her, and she may not survive her injuries. Joan can hear this, and she is in total disbelief of what she is hearing. She fell to her knees and cried and prayed because she didn't want to believe this was happening. It was also a 4-hour drive to get from where they were to the hospital that Johnia was in. Astonished by what she had just heard and not wanting to believe that it was true, Joan called her 2 sons, Tim and Kelly, because they were closer to Knoxville, and she told them, please get to the hospital as fast as you possibly can, because she needed to know if it was really their sister. Joan described that drive as the longest ride of her life. She prayed the entire time. She just kept repeating, God, please don't let it be Johnia. And it rained the entire way there, as if the sky was opening up and crying with her. On that drive to Knoxville, Johnia's parents hoped that they had misheard the person who told them that their daughter may not survive. When Johnia's brothers arrived at the hospital, they were told they had to wait. And it seemed like hours before they were finally told that they could look at a picture of a woman who had been stabbed. They were praying it wasn't her. But as soon as the doctor flashed the first photograph of a woman's face, they knew. They knew it was her, their little sister. Poor Johnia. It was real. When Johnia's parents arrived, they were still holding out hope. But as soon as they saw Joan's son Kelly run to their car, hysterically crying, right outside the hospital in Knoxville, Mike and Joan knew. They knew they heard right. And the news got worse. Johnia was gone. She did not survive her injuries. The boys had to break the awful news to their mother. Kelly just uttered, "It's Johnia, Mom." And it was the most horrific day of their lives. They weren't even able to comprehend the magnitude of their loss at this point. And while they were left to grieve, detectives were working on Johnia's case. After the ambulance had rushed her to the hospital, investigators cordoned off her apartment and they started to search for evidence. And the first thing investigators noticed was that it didn't seem like there were any forcible entry points at the apartment. Either this person was let in, or they had a key, or one of the doors was left unlocked. The first person they want to speak to is Johnia's roommate. After all, he was there, and they already had a few things that they thought were suspicious about his version of what happened that night. For one thing, why did he walk 14 minutes to a gas station to get help? I wanted to understand this for myself, so I pulled up a map to see the path that Jason potentially took. We cannot know for sure which stores were there at the time, but I do notice that this area is pretty residential in nature. They're living in an apartment complex, and there's another one right next door. There's a post office, but this is 4 o'clock in the morning. That's going to be closed. The library isn't going to be open. And after going down 10 Mile Road, he would have had the choice to go either left or right. And he chose to go left because there really isn't anything to the right as far as businesses are concerned, especially businesses that would be open at this point. And he probably knew that that gas station was open 24/7. That was most likely the closest place that he knew he could have gotten help. I don't see anything else that would have been open. There's a coffee shop, a Dollar General, and again, we don't even know if those places were there at the time. But I thought, couldn't he have stopped and tried to get a neighbor to let him use their phone? Which in my mind would have been way more convenient considering he lives in a pretty large apartment complex. If you look at the overhead view right here, there are a number of buildings, whether it's in their own apartment complex or the neighboring one. And even around that, there's a neighborhood on 10 Mile Road. It seems like there would have been a lot of residents in that area. So I was confused, as I'm sure the police were too, about why he would travel that far to use a phone. They were also curious about the wound on his hand. Could there have been a struggle between him and Johnia? Could he be the one responsible? That's their first question, but they have many more. Jason was released pretty quickly from the hospital, and he presented himself voluntarily to the Knoxville Sheriff's Department. He wanted to give an official statement. Jason and Johnia's relationship was the subject of the investigators' interest. He told police that he met Johnia in college, and he was letting her stay with him when she returned to Knoxville 6 weeks ago. He explained he has a girlfriend named Stephanie Keene, and her and Johnia are friends. Nevertheless, the investigators pressed him about whether they were more than friends, and Jason swore that him and Johnia never had a romantic relationship and that he didn't even have any romantic feelings toward her. Still, the police continued to question Jason repeatedly about his story. Jason said he returned home from work around 10:30 p.m. and Johnia was still awake, wrapping presents for Christmas right inside their door in this area right here in the apartment. You can still see some unwrapped toys on the floor in this crime scene photo. Johnia made her way to bed soon after Jason got home from work. And after he entered his bedroom, he fell asleep. Jason said he remained in that sound sleep until he was woken up by Johnia screaming in the middle of the night. When Jason rolled over, he looked at the clock and he noticed it was 4 a.m. And at first, he thought that Johnia was having a nightmare, but still, he went to find out what was going on. And when he opened his bedroom door, he saw a silhouette of someone he didn't recognize, a stranger. Someone was in their apartment. It was a man, and he was coming out of Johnia's room. The intruder noticed Jason, and without hesitation, Jason said the man ran toward him, grabbed him by the shoulders, and pushed him back into his bedroom and onto his bed, and then a struggle ensued. According to Jason's version of events, Jason said he could see that the man had a knife, and he started to stab him, which was the cause of all of his wounds. And at some point, he was able to push the assailant off of him. That's when he rushed by the assailant and out of his bedroom door. Then he proceeded out of the front door, down that first long flight of stairs, out of that glass door that everybody shared, down the other tiny staircase, and all the way toward that gas station to call for help. When the investigators asked him whether or not he saw Johnia, he said he never did. He could only hear her screaming, and he knew he had to get out of the apartment to save his life. He had no idea, according to him, what was going on in her bedroom. And we know what happened the rest of the time because when he got to that convenience store, we know the clerk called 911, and that is how authorities were able to get to the scene. However, investigators are piecing together Johnia's final moments. Investigators asked Jason, "Which door did you escape the apartment through?" He said that as he was running, he remembered unlocking the front door. So they asked him, "How do you think the intruder got access to your apartment?" And he said it was probably through the back door, because Jason couldn't remember if he locked it after throwing out the garbage. However, Johnia was meticulous about locking their doors, especially before she went to sleep at night. She would routinely walk around checking that all the doors were locked, but he couldn't tell you whether that door was locked that night, and he wasn't around to see her check the doors before she headed to bed. When investigators searched the back door of the apartment, they found blood, and this discovery led them to believe that the intruder had left the apartment through the back door. In comparison to Johnia's fatal injuries, Jason's wounds were relatively superficial, and that concerned investigators. One of Jason's only more severe injuries was a deep incision on his ring finger, which I had mentioned, and they thought it may have been caused by either grabbing the knife from the attacker or he could have accidentally cut himself while he was stabbing Johnia. Not only that, they were even starting to think his wounds could have been self-inflicted. Investigators reviewed Jason's 911 call because they wanted to know, are there any inconsistencies between what he said on the phone and what he's telling them now? While Jason told the dispatcher that he heard Johnia screaming when he ran out of the house, in his interview, Jason said he wasn't sure when he heard her screaming. Because remember, he said that's what woke him up. He was very hesitant because they asked him to take a polygraph, but he says he does want to clear his name, so he agrees to take it. But then the polygrapher tells him that he failed, and Jason just keeps denying killing Johnia. He stated that he actually feared for his own life because the murderer was still out there. He felt like they were accusing him of killing his friend, and he became even more upset. The polygrapher even had to tell him to calm down, but he kept telling Jason that he failed, and that's when he wouldn't calm down. Instead, he got louder. He was yelling right at this man, saying, "Why would I voluntarily take this test if I had something to hide?" He just kept saying he felt like they think he did this. And the polygrapher said, "Well, it sure looks like you did." And that riled Jason up more. The argument went back and forth, with Jason becoming very heated. And the polygrapher kept saying, "There's no reason for you to get mad," but for Jason there was. He was being accused of murder, and it's not something to take lightly. Well, then a second polygrapher reviewed Jason's lie detector test results, and they determined that the first examiner had made some mistakes, and that Jason had actually passed. Kind of sketchy, but then again, these things are not a science, and that's why they're not admissible in a court of law. Jason was also all they had at this point, so they took this opportunity to ask him to sit down with a sketch artist to draw his description of the suspect. Jason said the man had short brown or blonde hair, and a square chin. He was younger, possibly in his 20s, stocky, and kind of had droopy eyes that were shaped like pecans. He was under 200 pounds, maybe around 180. So authorities released the image to the news and waited for tips to come in. Meanwhile, back at the crime scene in Jason's bedroom, investigators find a piece of cardboard on the floor with a partial shoe print on it. So they go ahead and preserve that as evidence. Now here's the part of the story that angered me and saddened me. Outside Johnia's apartment door, there were signs that she had tried to get help from her neighbors, which is just heartbreaking to me. And it was heartbreaking for investigators to see, some of which had children of their own. This poor girl used the last bit of her strength to knock on every single door. 5 doors. The door right next to hers was only a few feet away, if that. And it had distinctive bloody knuckle prints on it. Not one of her neighbors came to her rescue. She made her way down the stairs and continued to drag herself to each and every door, becoming too weak to move and then finally collapsing in the doorway. She might have survived if just one person that heard her knock on their door answered. Why didn't they? I understand it's 4 a.m. I understand this is a scary situation, but all it takes is one call. That's it. Just one call for one person to help this poor girl. This is not a new phenomenon. There's a famous case I studied in both law school and when I was getting my psychology degree. The Kitty Genovese case out of New York. It happened back in 1964 at 3:15 in the morning. I'll never forget this story. 28-year-old bartender Kitty Genovese was followed home by a man. He forced her to have intercourse and stabbed her outside of her own apartment building where she lived. Despite her crying and screaming for help, nobody came. That investigation started research into the bystander effect, or the Genovese syndrome. And this is a real thing. People do stand by and do virtually nothing. And there are reasons for this. There are. Usually it's fear. But investigators in Johnia's case are shocked that in 2004, not one of her neighbors did anything. But could they have possibly slept through it? They didn't know yet. They could ascertain Johnia's approximate movements due to the amount of blood, the smears, the trail. She was able to make it out of her bedroom after multiple wounds. And we will get to the autopsy. She made it to the living room where it looked like she collapsed or she had to rest. They gather this from the stain that was left behind. This was a big one in the living room. At some point, with the will to live, she was able to get up off of that floor and get out of her apartment door. And she knocked on the one next to her. No answer. And like I said, she somehow made her way all the way down those stairs to every other door. But she was just too weak. And when Johnia's mom became aware that her daughter had attempted to save her own life and no one helped her, it was beyond her understanding. It was heartbreaking and devastating. It was also really disturbing to her because authorities did let her know that even though they can't guarantee it, there is a possibility that if someone would have called an ambulance sooner, Johnia could have survived. They could have done surgeries to keep her alive. This was what was the most heartbreaking to me. Envisioning your child's last moments. That's something that I would replay over and over again in my head because I'm already doing that now. I can only imagine if this happened to someone that I love and I care about the way a mother does, and someone she will never see again. Back at the crime scene, investigators finally locate the weapon that was used in this crime. And to their surprise, it's actually a kitchen knife from Johnia's own kitchen. So this started to lend itself to one of their first theories, which was that Jason, her roommate, was involved. The fact that this weapon came straight from their own kitchen led the investigators to believe that this was a crime of passion, especially because of the location of her wounds and how many of them there were. They thought it might have to do with Jason being rejected, and that was their working theory at this point. The weapon was found right outside Johnia's door. It's right here in this photo. And you can see the knife is almost bent in half. This is how much force was used. It was bagged as evidence. Later, they found a fingerprint as well as hair and blood on this knife. Now let's talk about what they found at the back door. There are stairs leading down from the back door of this apartment. They found blood in a trail from the back door down the staircase. It was in a less significant amount. This is why they asked Jason which door he used, because they thought that it was interesting that Johnia had sustained so many wounds, and Jason had not. They took swabs to test his blood. But now they're also thinking, if Jason's telling the truth, whoever this blood belongs to could be the person that did this. When these type of crimes occur and force is used, we obviously know how slippery the weapon can become. A lot of times the assailant actually gets injured in the process, so that is why they were interested in the wound on Jason's hand, because a slip of a knife. They also determined, because of where the trail was, that the person was right-handed. It coincided with the fact that they would have been holding the knife in that hand, and that is where the blood trail was, down the right side of the staircase handrail. So now, their next step would be to attempt to either eliminate Jason by finding out if there was somebody else in that area treated for a significant hand wound on the right hand on the night of the crime or sometime thereafter, or finding out it was Jason's blood. They also needed to find out about the shoe print that they found on the cardboard box in Jason's room. These were their two biggest clues right now. Meanwhile, they also have to move on to another man in Johnia's life, another person who could have had the passion to lead them to do something like this. It was the other Jason White, her fiance. Jason had to be notified about losing his fiance just like everyone else had been. Jason was 600 miles away in Lansing, Michigan, when his future mother-in-law, Johnia Berry, called him at 10 a.m. to give him the devastating news. Just 12 hours earlier, Johnia had been alive, speaking with him on the phone. It would have been shocking to get a call like this. When Joan told Jason, he let out a frightening scream, and it was so loud that it was heard outside of his apartment door. A neighbor, Melissa, was so concerned that she went over to see what was wrong, and all she saw him do was just sit there hysterically crying. When he could finally speak, he told Melissa what was going on, and he couldn't do anything for himself. She had to help him to pack his things, to get him to the airport, get him on that flight, because he needed to get by Johnia's side as soon as possible. Jason was beside himself, but that didn't matter to police. As soon as he got into town, they asked him to come in for an interview. Investigators questioned Jason White for 4 hours to determine whether he had any involvement. They wanted to know all about their relationship. They asked him, "Are you a jealous guy?" Johnia was very pretty. Did you get jealous if she was talking to other guys, living with another guy? But Jason swore that him and Johnia had a great relationship and they were in love, and he had nothing to do with her murder. They found through phone records that Johnia talked to Jason until about 11:30 p.m. on the night she was murdered. During his interview, Jason White told investigators that him and Johnia spoke almost every night until she drifted off to sleep. They questioned whether Jason White would have been able to drive from Michigan to Tennessee, or fly, or take a train, carry out this crime at the time they believe it occurred, and then get back to Michigan. But when they looked into all this, there was no way he could have accomplished it. Because of this, Jason White, Johnia's fiance, was cleared of suspicion. No one had anything bad to say about either of them. Both Johnia and Jason's friends all loved them and said they were great people, that they didn't have any enemies, and they had a loving relationship. Johnia's family also loved having Jason White in their lives, and they were looking forward to him becoming their son-in-law. The entire Berry family eagerly anticipated Johnia's wedding, but now they were planning Johnia's funeral. It was all too unreal. 3 days after her murder, Johnia was laid to rest in Bristol, Tennessee, and it rained through the entire funeral. Sadly, Johnia would never be alive to experience her wedding, but she was wearing both her wedding dress and her engagement ring. Jason wanted her to keep it, of course, and he put that ring on her finger for the last time as she was laid to rest. Unfortunately, it would not slide onto her ring finger due to how swollen it was, so he had to put it on her pinky. Johnia's murder ripped a large hole in her parents' hearts. As far as Mike and Joan Berry were concerned, their daughter Johnia had no enemies, and they had no idea why anyone would want to hurt her. Johnia loved life so much. Her parents couldn't even imagine a world without her in it. things would never be the same for the Berry family. During her funeral, everyone commented on her roommate Jason's behavior. There were many people there, especially her family, that were mad that he even showed up. They really believed he had something to do with her murder. The fact that he didn't try to help her or stay behind to see if she got out alive was an issue. It's something that many of Johnia's friends and family members could not understand. Why leave her? Some people said that he acted weird. He was too calm. But he had just been through a traumatic experience. Even though investigators had done as much as they could to rule Jason out of the picture, they did have a theory that made sense to them. They think that Jason had shown interest in Johnia, and she rejected him, which caused him to stab her in a fit of rage. So investigators returned to Johnia's apartment with Jason after the murder and asked him to walk through the crime scene. Jason recounted the horrific events of that morning in December, and investigators were actually pretty surprised by his lack of emotion. In their view, Jason might be emotionally avoiding describing the murder because he committed it. Or maybe he's just dealing with the experience of this trauma in his own way. He was just so matter-of-fact. Even Jason's girlfriend Stephanie started to question things. Even though he maintained his innocence, there was just this what if lingering in the back of her mind. And that must be really hard. You want to trust the person you love. You don't want to believe they did anything like this. But at the same time, do you really know a person? A crime lab tested the blood from the apartment and the blood drops by the back door. The DNA discovered at the crime scene matched Johnia and Jason, but also a third person, an unknown male. Finally, the DNA results confirmed Jason's story. Someone else was there. Someone else was injured. Someone else bled and fled. This DNA was on a light switch, on the weapon, and outside the back door and down that staircase I showed you that leads out of the back of the apartment. Jason's blood was not found in this location. It was found in the front, on the doorknob and the door lock, confirming his story, thus finally clearing him as a suspect. However, the allegations against him tarnished Jason's reputation. Not only was he traumatized and injured after hearing his roommate die, he had to live with survivor's guilt, wishing that he could have done something more. But he was also accused of being her murderer. And because of all this, he had to leave town. He moved to Colorado with his brother. He was suffering from chronic pain and reoccurring nightmares. And that's if he could fall asleep, because he was also dealing with insomnia. Since Jason was terrified of living alone, he stayed with his brother for almost 2 years. Unfortunately, Jason's health care only covered about a quarter of his hospital bills, and the financial strain was debilitating for him. He was never the same after this incident. Although investigators repeatedly accused Jason of having superficial wounds, he later came forward and said that he suffered a collapsed lung as a result of the attack. There's nothing superficial about an injury like that. And looking back, I feel bad for Jason. Being wounded in such a traumatic way, it's mentally taxing, even if the wounds weren't that deep as the ones that killed Johnia. That emotional pain, it runs deep. We do not know what it's like to be in that situation. So I try really hard not to place judgment on him. After clearing Jason, investigators were even more determined to find out who the DNA belonged to. They were excited to run this DNA, and Johnia's family finally thought they were going to get answers. But there was no match in the CODIS database. And that's very frustrating. It usually means the person who committed this crime either hadn't been in trouble with the law before, or they had, but the crime didn't warrant providing a DNA sample. They were back to not having any viable leads or suspects. They needed to know who else was involved in Johnia's life and whether there was anyone that they should be looking at. So they began interviewing her coworkers. And several of her coworkers from Zales thought that her murder may have something to do with what happened in that parking lot a few hours before her murder. Her manager, Diana Johnson, told police that another coworker had walked Johnia to her car, but apparently a Chevy Blazer kept circling them as though they were watching the girls. And then when Johnia got in her car, the SUV followed her out of the parking lot. The police looked into this, but they did not get any further leads. Then the neighbors started coming forward. Remember, they do not have all the details we do. So they were reporting being woken up at 4 a.m. with the sound of someone frantically pounding on their doors. At least 2 neighbors said that they heard the sound around the same time. When they're explaining this, they're thinking back through everything they do know, and they said they assumed it was the assailant, not Johnia. After Johnia's murder, Brendan Park Apartments was buzzing with rumors when authorities were coming in and out of her unit. The common area was still being used, but the apartment complex replaced that bloody carpet within days. And then they said something. They said that her death was a result of DV. That was not correct. This wasn't a dispute between a couple or family member. No, this made it even worse because the media and the public did not want to stop looking in her roommate Jason's direction, even though he had been cleared by investigators. Now they're relying even more on Jason's description of the assailant. And the sketch they released, here's what it looks like. This was being passed out everywhere. Johnia's family would spend hours handing out hundreds, if not thousands of flyers throughout her community and beyond. They needed answers, no matter what it took. Her father said that he would spend the rest of his life finding out who did this to his daughter. The autopsy report had come in. There were at least 20 wounds. All over. Face, arms, midsection, chest, back. Defensive wounds. It was absolutely horrifying what she went through. Johnia's manner of death was clearly homicide, and the cause was loss of blood from multiple stab wounds. Johnia died from her wounds, from bleeding out. The community is so determined to find out who did this. They cannot believe this person is walking among them, could be living in the apartment complex. After that composite sketch was released in the media and distributed by Johnia's friends and family, a credible lead emerged. The tip was that there were a group of boys that had been committing robberies near Johnia's neighborhood around the same time of the murder. And one of these boys was a 19-year-old named Michael Percival. He only lived 1 to 2 miles away from Brendan Park Apartments, and he also looked very similar to the sketch, which is why this triggered someone to call in. There was also an outstanding arrest warrant for Michael in regard to a totally unrelated crime, so investigators brought him in for questioning. And when he was brought in, his shoes were the first thing that investigators looked at. They were size 11 Earth Sole slip-ons. Putting a picture here. They're like a suede outsole with a very distinctive bottom. The shoes looked exactly like the ones that could have made the print on that cardboard in Jason's bedroom. So investigators are excited. They think they might have found their guy. And they contact the district attorney so that they could get a warrant to collect the shoes as well as DNA and fingerprints. Meanwhile, while they're waiting, they begin to question Michael, asking him, "Where were you on the night of the crime?" And shockingly, Michael starts telling them everything. He admits to playing a role in both Johnia's murder and Jason's stabbing. Investigators cannot believe this. Michael revealed that Jason and Johnia owed money to a drug dealer. Michael was a drug dealer's friend and drove him to Brendan Park Apartments on December 6, 2004 to collect payment from Jason and Johnia. However, he was waiting, and when his friend didn't show back up to the car after a few minutes, Michael headed to Jason and Johnia's apartment. That's when he saw the drug dealer stabbing them. And he described the entire layout of the apartment in detail. There were some issues, though. The more that Michael talked, the less sense his story was making. And as a result, the investigators started to doubt his confession. There was no match between his DNA, his fingerprints, or the shoes. According to the police, Michael just wanted to be in the spotlight. He wanted to be involved in a high-profile case. That is sick. That is such a waste of time. How evil, leading the investigators in the wrong direction. But of course, he was ruled out as a suspect, and the case comes to a dead end once again. Mike and Johnia Berry, along with the Knox County Sheriff's Department, they announced in February 2005 a $10,000 reward for any information leading to an arrest concerning the murder of Johnia Berry. As a matter of fact, Joan called the investigators and the police every single day asking for an update. During a press conference, Mike Berry said they needed to get the murderer of his daughter off the streets and prosecute him to the fullest extent of the law. He wanted people to keep focus on what's important, finding out who murdered Johnia on December 6, 2004. Johnia's award fund received $5,000 from Carol Sund Carrington Memorial Reward Foundation. The foundation honors Carol Sund, her daughter Julie, and their friend Solvina Peloso that were killed in 1999 by a serial killer named Carrie Stainer in Yosemite Mountains. An additional $5,000 came from an anonymous source, and eventually the reward went up to $75,000. But even as more tips came in, nothing solid came out of them. And years went by with no answer. However, the Berry family never gave up. They were pressing authorities to do more and more, especially for victims of these types of crimes. They needed to keep Johnia's case alive. And even though Johnia's parents lived in Georgia, they would frequently drive out to Knoxville to hand out flyers and hang posters. Joan had a goal, and that was to keep her daughter in the public eye. So she would call Tennessee news stations all the time. Several grocery chains in Tennessee actually featured Johnia's picture and the reward information on their delivery trucks. So as they drove up and down the interstate, investigators hoped that someone would recognize something about her case. The entire time Joan Berry worked tirelessly for her daughter, she was also working a full-time job. It's like having 2 full-time jobs to dedicate yourself to. In 2007, a break came in Johnia's case because of Joan and Mike's dedication to keeping their daughter's name in the public eye. On one of those many highways throughout Tennessee, a driver noticed Johnia's billboard, and he saw the composite sketch, and he thought it looked like a man he knew. Someone named Taylor Olson. This tip caught investigators' attention because he did resemble the composite sketch, even more so than that guy who gave the false confession. Taylor was also a young man. He was in his early 20s, and he was from a very affluent family. Taylor Olson was born in 1985 in Eugene, Oregon, and had a 16-month-old son. When his family was interviewed, they said that Taylor was a creative young man who wrote incredible poems, and he was a talented artist, that he had a loving heart and a wonderful, infectious way to make people laugh and smile. They also said that he had a passion and talent for riding dirt bikes and a deep love for animals, especially his beloved dog, Paris. He loved spending quality time with friends and family, and he definitely didn't sound like the type of guy that they were looking for. And even when they show Jason, the roommate, Taylor's picture, he cannot confirm that that's the guy that stabbed him and Johnia that night. So investigators are not too sure about this tip. They've already wasted their time with the other guy they thought it could be. They don't want to waste their time again. But they realize, when running his information, that Taylor had been arrested before. However, it wasn't for anything like this. While investigating Taylor Olson, they do notice that he has an outstanding warrant for a probation violation. So they arrested him to bring him in for questioning. During this detention in July of 2007, Taylor Olson voluntarily provides a DNA sample. When he's questioned about Johnia's murder, he denies involvement at all. The DNA test results were delayed for several months due to a backlog at the crime lab. So in the meanwhile, Taylor Olson is just sitting in custody, and investigators are waiting patiently for the outcome of the tests. Finally, December 20th, 2007, investigators on Johnia's case received the call that they have been waiting for. We hear this all the time, and we're like, yes, 3 years. It's been 3 years. They have a match. Taylor Olson's DNA was a match for the blood found on the back staircase. His DNA was discovered in the hallway, the living room, the door handle, and that staircase. And one of his fingerprints was on the murder weapon. They are confident it was Taylor Olson who murdered Johnia. Again, they brought him back in for questioning and to confront him about what they found. And again, Taylor denied killing Johnia. He kept saying he didn't know how his blood could have gotten there. Well, investigators answered him saying, it's because you were there. That's why. However, this time, investigators had forensic evidence at their disposal. After 2 days of interrogating him and attempting several different techniques, they got a confession. They had to do like the good cop, bad cop. I saw this entire interview. Despite Taylor denying it over and over again and refusing to back down, these investigators were persistent, and it paid off because he finally confessed. According to Taylor, he and a friend who lived near Johnia tried to steal a car from the Brendan Park apartments. They were walking around the parking lot and they were pulling on the door handles to cars. They were looking for one that was unlocked so they could hotwire it. Well, another resident saw him and his friend acting really suspiciously in the parking lot, and so he yelled at them to get out of there. Taylor's friend fled the scene, but Taylor decided he's going to stay back and continue looking for a vehicle. He wasn't having any luck, so he decided that he's going to start to try to open some doors to apartments so that he could find some keys, do the little thing where you look around for whose keys they are by beep beep in the parking lot. And he was just going to use those keys to take a car. So Taylor was walking around, turning the doorknobs to see if any of the apartments had open doors. And that's when he stumbled upon Jason and Johnia's apartment. He was at the back door, turned the knob, and the door opened smoothly. He said he used his phone as a light source, and he illuminated the apartment and walked around in this eerie glow, trying to locate some keys. He made his way around the kitchen, the living room, the foyer. Nothing there. That's when he went into Johnia's room as she slept. He crept beside her bed. He opened her bedside table and he began to rummage through it. But as he did, he says that all of a sudden he felt a sharp pain in his arm and a woman's voice saying something like, "Who are you?" Taylor assumed that Johnia was sleeping with a knife and stabbed him when she saw him standing there in the room, not knowing who he was. After he realized he was stabbed, he said he panicked and he tried to grab the knife and there was a struggle. And then finally, when he gained control of it, he began to frantically stab Johnia. Well, the investigators were not buying this version of the events. They believe he grabbed the knife when he was rummaging through drawers in the kitchen. Because when he was not successful in locating keys, he knew he was going to go into those bedrooms. And he wanted to arm himself. He went into Johnia's room, and once she woke up, she screamed. And they think he stabbed her to stop her from making a scene or from identifying him. Taylor told investigators he had no recollection of Jason ever being there and does not remember injuring him or struggling with a second person. After his arraignment, while he was walking out of the courthouse sobbing, he told the media he didn't mean to kill Johnia, that it was an accident. And he had the nerve to say, "I ruined my whole life." Joan wasn't buying this and had no pity. It was no accident that he went into Johnia's apartment and then into her room, and no accident that he was attempting to steal her car. Johnia Berry was in the prime of her life. She was about to get married and to go back to school. He took her life. Taylor ruined Johnia's life and her family's lives, not his. $1 million bail was set for Taylor after he was charged with Johnia's murder. Still, he begged investigators to believe him. He said it wasn't him. He even started telling a new version of events and blaming the crime on the friend that he said he was with, Noah Cox. But investigators had no doubt that they could get a conviction against Taylor at trial because there was no other DNA or biological evidence of anyone else at that crime scene besides the two victims and this man, Taylor Olson. Mike Berry spoke at a press conference after the arrest, and he thanked the investigators who worked so hard on Johnia's case. He thanked them for their efforts and said that him and his wife considered them more than just acquaintances. They were friends. Taylor's arrest actually occurred 2 days after Joan and Mike celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary. They described his arrest as a very meaningful gift to them. Sadly, Joan and Michael Berry would never get to see Taylor Olson in court because on March 24, 2008, 4 months before the trial was scheduled to start, Taylor Olson was found deceased in his jail cell. It was determined to be self-inflicted. Before his death, Taylor had told investigators there was no way he would stand trial. And in their grief, Johnia's parents described Taylor as taking the coward's way out. Even after so much fighting, Mike and Joan now seem to have no chance of getting justice for their daughter. Taylor Olson left a note behind, saying that it wasn't him who stabbed Johnia. In the letter, he identified the individual he believed was responsible for Johnia Berry's death, expressing that he hoped that that person would be held accountable. Johnia's father did not believe Taylor's claims. He said his blood was there, his DNA was there. He killed my daughter in a cowardly way, and he took the coward's way out. If he wasn't really the one who murdered her, then why did he take his own life? And I pose that question to all of you because this is a sad and complicated case. A young father with his life ahead of him is accused of killing a young woman with such promise in life. What do you think? In the note that he left behind, Taylor claimed it was Noah Cox that killed Johnia. When Johnia was murdered, Noah lived across the street from Brendan Park Apartments. But Noah denies playing a role in Johnia's murder. After Taylor died, court records were published and they indicated that he was preparing a defense. And it was based on the theory that Noah Cox had killed Johnia while they were in the apartment trying to burglarize it. But again, I'm going to repeat, there was no evidence that Noah Cox was ever at the scene of Johnia's murder, and he was never charged with any crime in connection with her death. I wanted to actually read you what Taylor's family wrote on his obituary. They said he went to be with the Lord unexpectedly in the early morning hours of March 24, 2008. And then there were specific instructions for his funeral. He requested that certain songs be played for him, and this just really angered Mike Berry. He said that he didn't get to tell his daughter goodbye before she died and felt like her murderer shouldn't have a say in what happens after he dies. What do you think about that? Johnia Berry's family sued the apartment complex where she was murdered for failing to protect her. The Brendan Park Apartments settled out of court with the family. It was a claim that the building was not secure. Additionally, her parents criticized the sheriff's office because they had ignored their concerns for assistance from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, which they had done early on in the case. I want to end with some good news. The Berry family finally received some. A Senate committee approved the Johnia Berry Act. This act was proposed in Tennessee to increase the odds of finding suspects by requiring violent felons to submit DNA upon arrest rather than conviction. Joan and Mike Berry believe the state had way too few DNA samples in the database. They hope that the Johnia Berry Act would help other families find justice for their loved ones and make Tennessee a safer place to live. Johnia loved to help people, and this was just another way that she could do that even in death, according to her father. Eventually, the Johnia Berry Act was fully enacted, and DNA is now collected on arrest rather than just after conviction. If this act had been in place before Johnia's murder, Taylor Olson might have been taken off the streets long before he killed her. To carry on Johnia's legacy and honor her love for children, her loved ones actually hold a holiday toy drive every year. And I was hoping to get this video out before December 6th. It's just a way to pay tribute to Johnia, who was wrapping Christmas gifts for children from low-income families on the night she was murdered. This event is still going on in East Tennessee and Southwest Virginia. Everyone is invited and encouraged to bring a brand new unwrapped toy for children in need. All the donated toys are delivered to the area's children's organizations, and the toys are expected to be distributed on December 6th of this year. PayPal also allows donors to make secure online donations, so I will leave that link below. The donations will be collected and given to Hope for Victims. Johnia would have accomplished remarkable things in this world if it wasn't for her tragic death. She would have made a difference in this world, and she is. We are keeping her memory alive. The Berrys were grateful for the time that they had with Johnia. It was better for her to be there for this short time than to never have had her at all. Well, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so very much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye.